Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Shut Up and Read. Today I'll be doing my list of overhyped books. For whatever reason, I thought I had done a video like this similar in the past, but I couldn't find it, so perhaps this is the first time that I have done an overhyped books video. But anyway, let's just get right into it. So before I dive into all of these books, I do want to say very quickly that these are just my opinions, and I know a lot of people have really enjoyed these books, otherwise they wouldn't be as hyped up as they were. But for me personally, they just did not live up to its hype. So the first book that I want to discuss is They Both Die at the End by Adam Severa. This was just a book where I had expected a lot of emotional reaction from myself, but that didn't happen at all, so I was definitely disappointed on that end. But basically, this book is set in a somewhat of a futuristic world where people receive a phone call telling them that it's their last day alive. And the book follows two boys, Mateo and Rufus, who both receive that phone call around midnight. And at first they're complete strangers, but of course because of special circumstances they end up meeting due to this app called a Last Friend app, I want to say. Might be wrong on that end, it's been a while since I read this book, but that app basically allows other people who have received that phone call to connect with new friends for that last day. So the two boys end up meeting because of that app. So like I said already, this book was just very disappointing for me because I had expected to be just so emotional, but that wasn't the case for me at all. I actually didn't even like the characters because Mateo was kind of a downer for a lot of times, and Rufus kind of reminded me of an ex, so that was not great either. And the romance in this book, because at the end of the day this is a YA contemporary romance novel and there is a love story in this book, did not satisfy me. It was very unrealistic and very stilted at times. And honestly, the romance kind of came out of the blue. From Mateo's end, I can kind of see the hints here and there, but from Rufus's end, he basically spent like the entire first half, 3/4 of the book discussing and grumbling about his ex-girlfriend. And then suddenly, at the very end, somehow their love connects and they end up together. I don't know, it's just very bizarre for me and I could not relate to that romance at all. So overall, at the end of the day, there were definitely some elements to it that I did not like, but the one element that I did kind of enjoy was how the author brought up the question, like, what would you do if today was your last day living? And that kind of was an interesting question because that allowed me to really think and ponder while I was reading this book, because I was thinking to myself, what would I do if it was my last day? But other than that though, it was just okay. The second book or books that I want to discuss is part of a series, and that is the Darkest Mind series by Alexandra Bracken. This is a series where there's just so much hype over it. There's just so much hype over it last year, I want to say, and it did not live up to its hype at all. So this is a dystopian series where it follows the fact that all the children, I want to say in the US specifically, have fallen ill to some sort of disease or plague, and those who have somehow survived and not perished somehow develop these extraordinary supernatural abilities. And these abilities are also color coded. I believe yellow means electricity, fire means red, and there's blue, green, and orange as well, so 5 different types of abilities. So the series essentially follows a girl called Ruby who wakes up one day to find that she is one of the dangerous ones. And she ends up in a camp where it's run by the government, because at this point in time, the government are terrified of what has happened to their children, and so they have set up all these camps to kind of monitor them. So she gets sent off to this camp and she ends up barely escaping with her life. And the rest of the series just kind of follows her survival with some of the other teenagers who have somehow managed to escape from their own camps, etc. And the story just kind of goes from there. But this was definitely a series where I just felt so disappointed. It was not a terrible series, but it was just not as good as I had imagined. I actually didn't even like Ruby, the main character. To be honest, I found her kind of annoying and whiny and honestly very naive at times. And the book also has this trope of the two brothers where one is, you know, very good, he's kind, very genuine, like all those good qualities, and then the other brother is kind of a black sheep. And the other series that has the same type of brother trope going on is the Shadow Me series, and I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to spoil anything because you haven't read it. But this book, when I was reading it, I read it after the Shadow Me series, just didn't compare because there were a lot of correlations, a lot of parallels between those brothers versus the brothers in the Darkest Minds, where I just felt that the Shadow Me brothers were just so much better in so many different aspects. And so I guess I was just very disappointed when I was reading about the two brothers in this series. Another aspect that I was kind of disappointed on was the action. I mean, there was a lot of action. There's so much action going on, but I felt like the action didn't really have much purpose to it. And for whatever reason, it just didn't really engage me. So I just couldn't feel myself really wanting to engross myself into the books. I just wanted to read them, because there are books where that happens, where I just want to sit and read and know what happens next, and that did not happen in this book at all, despite all of the action and all the plot, etc. But for whatever reason, this book just did not entice me as much. So while there were some aspects to this series that I did enjoy, such as the supernatural abilities, because I did find it kind of interesting to find out what exactly were these abilities and how they kind of differ from each other and within each ability as well. But overall, there are just too many elements to this series I just didn't care for. The character, the plot, the brothers, etc. Even after reading the books, I was like, I still have hope for it, and a movie came out, and so I went to go watch the movie, and I was very disappointed on that end as well. I think I did a video on that a while ago, so I'll link that above in case you want to check that out, but that movie was just... So I think most people were very disappointed with that movie as well, and it did not do well in theaters. The next book that I want to discuss is kind of sad to say, but that is Descendant of the Crane by Joanne He. There's honestly so much hype about this book right now. I think it came out just in April, and I read this back in March and was just so disappointed on so many levels. This book is set in a fantasy world that's inspired by China, and it follows a young princess called Hasina. Her father, the king, had just passed away, but she now believes that her father was actually murdered, and because of course she wanted to find out what happened to her father, she ends up enlisting the help of a soothsayer as well as a convict to help with the investigation. Except for the thing that magic as well as soothsayers have basically been banned from the kingdom for centuries now. So she's now dealing with this investigation about her father's death, trying to hide the fact that she's been using the soothsayers and the magic involved with there as well as dealing with the unrest in her kingdom because now she is the queen of her country. So the book honestly was just not great. I gave it 2 stars because I was just so disappointed on so many levels. Basically, the one part I really liked about this book was the cultural references. I really did like that because the author actually used a lot of Chinese words to describe certain things, and of course I was able to connect with them because I do speak Mandarin, so I really liked those little like references here and there. But that was essentially the only good thing I think about the book. I found the writing to be choppy and would just jump from scene to scene. And the characters, except for Hasina, were definitely one-dimensional as well. Hasina was definitely the most well-rounded of all the characters, but there were a lot of secondary characters that were very important. And so it was kind of sad to see that they were not developed as much as I would have liked them to be. And at the end of the day, I just could not connect with any of the characters. And the ending, guys, that was probably the most disappointing aspect of this book because this is a standalone. At least I believe it's a standalone. At least that's how it is on Goodreads. I don't know actually. But the ending was just the worst because nothing felt concluded. It felt like there could be a possibility for a sequel. So if it wasn't for the fact that I know, like 99% sure that this is a standalone, I wouldn't be that mad about it because I'm like, okay, at least there's going to be another book that will kind of conclude the overall story. But the ending was just very... not great. It didn't conclude anything. It kind of left things off at a very open-ended way, and for a book like this where it had so many elements and there's all these like leading points, etc., for it to just end like that in a non-conclusive way was just terrible. And so I just did not like the ending at all. It would have been one thing, like I said, if there was a sequel, in which case I'm like okay with the ending. Like I don't mind cliffhangers if there's an ending, but that's not the case with this book at all. So anyways, I'm just kind of sad because this is one of the few fantasy Chinese inspired novels out there, and this did not live up to its hype, but at least the cover is gorgeous, right? The next book that I want to discuss is The Chaos of Standing Still by Jessica Brody. This was another book where I heard that it was supposed to be very emotional, but that wasn't the case for me. This book follows a girl called Rin who somehow ends up being stranded at an airport. She has one unread message from her best friend from a year prior because that was when she passed away. And ever since then, she has been afraid of touching and opening that one last message. And because she ends up stranded at this airport, she ends up meeting a guy called Xander when they accidentally swap phones. And now because of circumstances, they end up going on this kind of adventure for the rest of the night. And of course, in the meantime, she cannot stop thinking about her dead best friend. So I don't think this book was for me. I gave it 2 stars because I was just very disappointed by it. I think the biggest issue for me was the main character, Rin. I did not like her at all. I found her to be kind of dense in some ways and kind of boring as well. And I honestly did not really like the way how she dealt with grief because it was kind of in a very toxic manner. So because of the way how I thought grief was dealt in this book and it was very toxic, I did not like the way how grief was portrayed in the book. But the one thing I did enjoy about the book, and the reason why I gave it 2 stars instead of 1 stars, were the side characters. I actually really like the side characters. Xander, Troy, and Siri were just absolutely hilarious, and I really liked reading about them. So overall, this book just didn't do it for me. The plot was just okay. It was kind of intriguing, but I don't think it was executed very well. I freaking hated the main character essentially. The side characters were great though, and I didn't like the way how grief was portrayed in this book at all. So yeah, definitely an overhyped book, I think. And the next book that I want to discuss is one that I know I might get a lot of backlash because a lot of people really like this book, and I just thought it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars. And that book is We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This book follows a girl called Marin who has left her old life behind and has not spoken to anyone back in her old life. And for whatever reason, I believe this is now around Christmas time, I want to say. I might be wrong. It's been a few months since I read this book, but she is now forced to confront her past. A lot of people had said that this was a very emotional book, but that wasn't the case at all. I feel like that's an underlying theme. Like I should not trust it when people say it's an emotional book because for a reason, their terms of emotional books does not coincide with my terms of emotional book, because all the books so far, at least 3 of them, this is the 3rd one, where I have discussed that a lot of people said it was emotional, which is why I was really anticipating it and why they hyped it up, and I was disappointed because I just did not feel that emotion. The one thing I did enjoy about this book though was the character development of Marin and that friendship she had with her best friend, but that was kind of it. And the plot itself was not bad. It was actually kind of interesting. There was a lot of build up to finding out what really happened and the main reason why Marin left her old life behind, but when that part was revealed, I was kind of just like, that's it? That's why you left? I felt that the build-up did not live up to my expectations, so I was just very disappointed on that end as well. So overall, this was not a bad book per se. There were just elements to it that I was very disappointed on, specifically the climax of the book, when the ultimate revealment of what had actually happened, as well as the emotional aspect to it, because I was just kind of like, okay. Sorry guys, but I think maybe I'm just not a reader that deals really well with emotional books. They just do not sit well with me, or they just don't live up to my expectations for whatever reason. So I think that's like, yeah, maybe that's what it is. So finally, I'm going to talk about my 2 honorable mentions. So these are 2 series that I did ultimately enjoy at the very end, but the reason why I want to include them in this list is because the first book was just very subpar, I think, and if it wasn't for the hype, I might not have actually continued with the series. So the first series I want to mention is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So I actually did an entire reading vlog on it, so I will include that above in case you want to check that out. There's no spoilers, by the way. This is an adult fantasy series where it follows a guy called Kel, who is the last Antari, or one of the last Antari, which means that he can actually travel between worlds. And there are 4 worlds: the gray, the red, the white, and the black. The red world is the one where he comes from, and that one is where magic is thriving. The gray world is kind of like our world where there's no magic. The white world is one where magic is slowly dying and people are kind of fighting to get some sort of magic. And then the black world is where magic basically overcome the entire world and destroyed it. And so that world is pretty much MIA. So Cal is one of the last Antari, and he's basically an ambassador of some sort where he travels between worlds to receive information and news. One day something happens and he ends up escaping into the gray world, runs into a girl called Delilah, and this whole adventure happens from there. So this is a series where I gave 4 stars, but the first book honestly was just really... It took a lot of effort, guys, for me to finish that book. I mean, I did finish it really quickly because I still want to know what happened, but it definitely took way more effort than I had expected because everyone loved the series. But I did read after finishing the series that a lot of people had the same kind of struggle where they felt the first book was definitely not on the same level as the second and third book. I mean, the start of the first book was great. I really liked the first world building and all that stuff and the first half of the book, but then the second half just kind of petered off and I just did not care much for it. And then for book 2, I had the exact same reaction where I felt the first half was just so boring and the second half to be so much more interesting and action-packed. And of course, the last book was my favorite. I gave that one 5 stars, which is why I ultimately gave the whole series 4 stars because that last book was just perfection, guys. So basically, the main reason why I want to include the series in this video is because honestly, if it wasn't for the hype, I would not have continued finishing the series because that first book, guys, the first half was really interesting. I really liked the magical element, the magic system, but that was it. Thank God though, honestly, for the third book because that changed my entire reaction and experience with the series. So the last book slash series I want to discuss is the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. This is definitely another series where there's just a lot of hype going on. I think this is also partly because of the Six of Crows duology as well as the Kings of Scars duology that was coming out or that just came out recently, and so a lot of people were hyping up this trilogy and I finally got to reading it and was not that impressed by it. So this series is still set in the Grishaverse and the series follows a girl called Alina who is pretty ordinary until one day something happens. She ends up saving her best friend and she reveals her dormant power, and this power ends up becoming the key to saving her ravished country, and now the rest of the series just follows her as she tries to learn more about her power, try to control and utilize it, and just so much more. So ultimately I did enjoy this series. I did overall give it 4 stars, but like the other honorable mention series I mentioned where it started off not great. The first book was just very subpar and finally it did become good at the end of the last book. And like the other honorable mention, this is definitely a series where honestly I would have DNF'd the first book if it wasn't for the fact that I already liked the Grishaverse because I read the Six of Crows duology first, and it wasn't for the fact that other people really enjoy the series. Like a lot of people seem to really enjoy the series, so I was like I want to continue it even though the first book was just okay. So one of the main reasons why I didn't really like the series, other than the characters, I'll talk about that later, was the lack of world building. This trilogy came out prior to Six of Crows, and so for me I felt the lack of world building was a huge downer because Sister Crows, I read that a few years ago, I want to say, or like 2 years ago, I want to say, and so I kind of knew about it, but at the same time, I haven't really refreshed my memory, and I don't remember some of the elements and all the other stuff, the magic system, very well. So I was basically reading the series as if I had never read the Grishaverse prior, and so for me it was kind of confusing for me to kind of understand what the heck was going on until later when I finally understood everything. So there was definitely a lack of world building in the beginning of the first book. And of course the other biggest issue, and I feel like a lot of people who didn't like the series had the same issue, was Alina as the main character. She was literally the worst. I just found her so annoying and very insecure. There's so many parts, especially in the first book, where she would literally be like, oh, I can't possibly be the one who have this power because I'm not pretty and I'm not pretty like they are. And I'm just like, so the reason why you don't think you have this power is because you're not pretty. So that part just really irked me. And it wasn't as if she was only saying that once or twice, but she had constantly repeated herself over and over again in the first book, especially in the first book. And I think one of the main reasons why I really didn't like the first book that much was because Nikolai, my favorite character, wasn't even introduced until the second book. So the first book was really just about Alina and her newfound discovery of her powers and just kind of cope with her newfound powers. And so that whole insecurity and annoying and that whiny girl was just very irritating to me. Coupled that with the confusing world building, it was just not a great first book. So anyways, that's all I want to say about the Grisha trilogy. I did kind of talk about it in one of my reading vlogs, so I will link that above in case you want to check that out. But anyways, those are all the books I want to discuss in this video. Let me know down below if you have read any of the books that I have mentioned in here, if you agreed with me, if you didn't agree with me. If you didn't agree with me and you actually really enjoyed one of these books, let me know down below and let me know why, because I'm kind of curious, because the reasons why I stated why I think they're overhyped might not be the same reasons why you liked it, so let me know down below. But as always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe down below, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!